Hip hop has always suffered from a Peter Pan syndrome, and there's a lot of downsides to that. And those downsides become more and more apparent as hip hop continues to grow and get older, especially now that as of a few days ago, hip hop celebrated, its 50th anniversary. And one of the most obvious downsides is the fact that rappers want to be young forever. Now, it's not really just a hip hop problem. That's more so just a pop culture problem in America, regardless of if it's music, TV, movies, social media, whatever. Usually people always want to remain, they always want to remain popular. They always want to remain trendy. And in many cases, in order to do that, you either have to be young or people have to perceive you to be young. In many cases, many artists will try to, if they're not actually young, one way they'll try to be perceived as young is to always associate with younger artists and get into younger trends or young people trends, I guess you could call it. But it's a major issue that I want to kind of touch on from a few different angles in this video. So recently, Nas sat down in an interview. The interview was with Billboard, and in that interview, he sent out a challenge to rappers that came out during his back in his heyday. And the challenge was pretty simple. The challenge was he wanted artists from his generation to keep making music, and not only keep making music but to work hard to make a good product. Now there's a lot of artists from Nas's era who still make music, but as Nas alluded to in that interview clip, many of them, or at least the ones that are like desperate to keep any sort of mainstream attention, they're not really working that hard to make the best product possible. They're more so focused on trying to go viral or trying to get any sort of mainstream attention that they could get, which requires hopping on trends. And it's not because this new wave genuinely sparks their interest and they're trying to master it, but in many cases it's usually because a lot of these artists, they may be more desperate to stay in the public eye. But is it worth it? I don't really think it is, because in many cases, many of these artists, they could just end up looking crazy. Recently, Wayno, who was became popular a few years ago from Everyday Struggle, he sat down in an interview with somebody. He made some comments that I believe roll into this topic as well. He challenged mainstream rappers to grow up and make content that is more reflective of their age. And I agree with that idea, but at this point, it's simply not going to happen. Many of these artists, eh, many of these artists make the type of content that the fan, even at some point, you got to hold fans accountable as well, because the fans themselves, or at least the fans of some of these artists, they're not the type of fans who do a lot of growing in life. They want to stay stagnant. They want to remain in the same old for years and years and years. So many of these artists, they know realistically, if they try to pivot into something more age appropriate when it comes to content, a lot of those followers are going to just walk away and go listen to whoever the new artist rapping about certain nonsense that younger people might rap about. Like they're going to gravitate towards that. I just mentioned in a few days ago in a different video about Meek Mill. I mentioned that you notice a trend that a lot of street rappers get into, where at a certain point they pretend like they're ready to go off and make more mature music, or rap about something more positive and switch gears. But like clockwork, the same thing happens, where they, maybe at best, they'll put out one or two songs kind of doing that to test the waters. It don't really work out. The fan base isn't really checking for it. It's not getting any engagement. And so because of that, obviously they panic, and because they're thinking more so about the bottom line, like making money, they just throw that out the window and go right back to making like more street music, even though they've been removed from that environment. If they ever lived in that environment in the first place, some of them are lying. But even for the ones that may have actually lived in that environment, they've been removed from that environment for years now. They've been very comfortable in the suburbs, but they don't have the type of fan base that wants to hear them talk about how comfortable it could be to live in the suburbs. Now, some people may be asking, why did I put Little Baby in this thumbnail, or not in the thumbnail, but in the title of this video as well? And how does this relate? I wanted to relate it back to when you see Little Baby recently had canceled several concerts and was struggling to sell tickets in certain venues. I think a part of that could be a growing up factor too, right? Because in many cases, the type of fan bases that actually want to spend the most money are usually the fan bases that feel the most connected to the artist. But if you're making music that, even if it sounds good, it's pretty surface level for the most part and doesn't really connect with people on that level, it could be very easy for a lot of people to not feel incentivized or as passionate enough to want to go buy tickets. If you're an artist that has grown over the years and a lot of the fans have grown with you, in many cases, they could almost feel like they grew up with you, and they could almost feel like you were around at a very important time in their life. And when you're that type of artist, people are usually gonna buy tickets no matter what. But when you're the type of artist who you're still rapping about the same thing you were rapping about 6 years ago, some of your fans, a lot of your fans, they might have been like 14 when they first got into you. Now they're 20, or they might have been 17. Now they're 23, or they might have been 20. Now they're 26 or 27, whatever. And they just may not look at that content the same way anymore, especially to the point where they want to go to a show. And I think that what Little Baby just experienced, I think a lot of artists are gonna experience that over the next several years, where a lot of their fans, it's not that they're necessarily gonna dwindle. I still think these guys could get a lot of streams, but it may reach a point, a weird point where they may kind of enjoy it from a distance, if that makes sense. They're not gonna want to stick around, or I'll say it like this instead. They might stick around and watch, but they may not want to fully invest like they used to, because they may get older and they may view a lot of things differently, and support things that reflect how the different person they have now become. Another reason I believe the Little Baby situation from a few weeks ago kind of relates back to this topic of growing up or making more mature content is, in general, a lot of people who aren't making more mature content, it's usually because they're not. That's simply not even like that's not the wavelength that they're thinking on in the first place. So the way they operate it may not reflect somebody who is really all that mature. And when you think about ways that mature people may operate and think, in many cases, mature people, as they get older, obviously they're gonna work hard. They're gonna spend years working. They're gonna value how they spend their money and time more. So if you're somebody who doesn't have that mature perspective on things, you're gonna be the type who doesn't mind wasting people's money or wasting people's time. And you see that in a lot of these shows where people show up to these concerts. Some of these artists, they show up like an hour and a half, 2 hours late. They perform like two or three songs. They have random people just grab the mic and who weren't listed on the flyer, and they just start performing or just talking and taking up time. And then when they perform, they may not even do anything all that interesting. There's no production value. They just go out there and walk back and forth and lip sync for about an hour, however long, while the actual song plays in the background. And as people get older, at least as the fans get older, they may tolerate that less and less, because they may look at you and say, man, I had to take time off work, or I had to do this or do that. If they had kids, they may have had to try to find a babysitter. Like they may have taken money that was supposed to be for bills to put towards this, and they may feel slighted because it feels like, hey, I put X amount of dollars in, and to as an investment into you and your career, and you're not even taking that same investment and investing in your career by providing a better production for me to watch on this stage in this performance. So all in all, I just think the major downsides, to tie everything back together, because I kind of went in different directions to tie everything back together. I think obviously the major downside is to hip hop not wanting to grow, or to mainstream rappers, because there's plenty of people on the underground who grow and make different content. But as far as like mainstream artists, I definitely believe the major downsides is it could be very cringy to watch them get older and still rap about the same topics that they were rapping about at 18 years old. They're still trying to push that same message and nonsense, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later. But then also another downside in the case of Little Baby is sometimes that stuff could fire back on you, because if you're not the type of artist who people really feel is growing like that, or people don't feel like they've really connected to o- over a long period of time from them growing while listening to your content, it could backfire in the sense that it'll make them less likely to want to financially support you years down the line. But let me know what your thoughts are on this. Do you think Little Baby situation is reflective of this, or do you think that this is just completely unrelated? And do you think that Wayno and Nas also have a point when they're challenging artists to grow and make different content, or make content that's more reflective of the new stages that they're getting to in life?